Welcome to the Empowerment Show, a weekly podcast call-in show that's here to enrich and educate the community of beautiful Northeast Pennsylvania and its surrounding areas. Hosted by Kendall Stevenson. With co-host Shaquana Terry. Tonight, Jose joins the host panel as we welcome special guest Dr. Bonilla-Rodriguez.
The opinions expressed on the radio program by the hosts, co-hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions and responsibility of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Genesis Radio, www.genesisradio.com, Genesis Radio's owners, management, or affiliates.
Good evening again. Welcome to GenesisRadio.com. This is the Empowerment Show, and my name is Kendall Stevenson. I'm the host. Shaquana Terry, my co-host.
Hi.
As usual, we like to start off with this little, Jose.
Jose Rosario.
He'll be on helping us out today.
It's not
Thank
that
you,
I forgot
Jose.
him. It's not that I forgot it. We gotta have to
Special
throw
guest
him
just
in.
walked in as well.
Our special guest just walked in.
Hey.
Let's give you a mic check. Can you hear yourself? 1, 2.
Check.
You hear yourself?
Yeah.
Good. How are we looking on camera, Mr. T?
Good.
Everybody good. Okay, as I was saying, I like to start off the show usually with a moment of gratitude. Things that people like to be grateful for. What I can say is that it's very good for people to have something to be gracious for. And the reason why I say that is not only for your spiritual health, it also helps you out physically because it kind of starts your day off and it puts you in a certain mood, make you feel good. Whether you're doing meditation, whatever form of gratitude or whatever form of exercise that you're doing to help you get up and go, I'm all for it. So if anybody else has anything else they'd like to be grateful for, jump on in.
I like to be grateful for waking up in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Last night we had our gathering that we have every week, and my best friend said, I'm happy to have woken up today. Not everybody did. And that's something my husband says, I say.
And if you say it every day, you wake up in a good mood.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So when you wake up in the morning, you look at your husband and say, hey, it's a new day.
You got me for another one.
My girl, what's happening?
You know, I'm always grateful for family, life, the things that matter most. A lot of disappointment because it shows me what matters most, as well as the sun, because I love to be out there and get that sunshine, and so that can give me, that sense of vitamin D, so that I can, feel good. Because so for some reason when it rains, my mood is down, but when that sun is shining, it just gets me going. So yeah, I'm grateful for that, and of course God.
Yeah.
Nice.
My man.
Me, I'm grateful for the people I'm surrounded by. I gotta say, I have a big group of positive people who are making moves in this town, in this area, and I love it. I'm very grateful.
Doctor. So we're gonna slide on over to you. From the boogie down.
Originally from East Harlem.
Originally from East Harlem.
And then came here from the boogie down.
So how did from the boogie down to here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you here, what do you do while you're here?
What don't I do is a better question. I just came home from dropping my kids off. They had tennis after school today. So my first job is being a mom, and I said, she's taking us deep already. She said, I'm grateful for this appointment. I was like, I better sharpen up. She's taking us deep already. But so my first job, I always say my most important job is being a mother, right? Raising 2 Hispanic boys in an area that is not was not set up for them, right? But
Got a better word.
Because we're
not
here,
exactly user friendly.
that's a good way to put it. But through the work that all of us and many others in our community from different backgrounds are doing, we're creating those spaces for them. Right? So my work focuses on advocacy, on being a voice for those that are not able to be a voice, right? When you talk about what are we grateful for, yesterday and at least once a week, I talk about the reality that not everybody can read and write, right? We have members of society and in our own community who are illiterate. And so they're not able to communicate the way that we can, or members of our community and society that do not navigate the English language or have citizenship barriers. And all of that means they are not comfortable and are fearful actually to speak up against any issues that their kids might be facing, that they might be facing regarding education or healthcare or any system that is not working for them, which is likely every system to some capacity. And so I pride myself on educating myself and others on what are those issues, and being able to use my privilege, because it is a privilege that we're each year able to speak freely, right? And that we're able to communicate in the ways that we do. And so how my question to myself is always, how am I using that to create space for others and make it safer? And I love what you said, so many positive people making moves in this area, because it does take all of us.
Right.
It really does.
Yes, it does. And just to interject here, you are actually listening to Dr. Damary Bonilla-Rodriguez,
I
correct?
guess you're pronouncing that
Okay.
perfectly.
Yeah, that's what she does. That's what she does.
You're
man.
listening, you're hearing the wonderful voice of Dr. Rodriguez. I just wanted to I don't think we introduced you.
Okay.
We have one caller.
Good evening. Welcome to the Empowerment Show. Give us a call. You gave us a call. What's happening? What do you got to say? We'd like to ask you to turn your radio down, please.
Turn the radio. Turn the radio down.
Can you turn your radio all the way down, please? Thank you. You have a question for the doctor?
I think they hung up. There's some feedback, so they'll probably give us a call back.
Okay. Give us a call back. Anybody else want to give us a call? The telephone number here is 888-304-4401. That's 888-304-4401. You know, doctor, I was when you were talking about the the illiteracy of children, I back in the 60s, people that look like you and I, they didn't have people like you to help people like me. So I was one of those people who have developmental dyslexia. So I think you know what that is, right? So my reading and writing skills didn't come into play until I was 14, 15 years old. So I understand about those type of people and the service that you perform. Do you do this in the Board of Education, or are you your own group, or?
So it's my life's work because of exactly what you mentioned. It wasn't until you were a teenager that you were able to develop those skills. And my grandparents raised me. I grew up in the projects in East Harlem, New York, and they didn't speak the language, and they went to the first and the third grade. So I always say that when I communicate, I'm trying to communicate with them. Although they both passed away, that's my lens. So there are times when people will make comments because I don't use academic terms and I don't use complicated language. So I actually have to do the reverse. When I'm in academic spaces, I have to kind of switch it on, because my everyday lens is, could my grandparents understand me? Because if they couldn't, does it really matter? Because if they couldn't, then a first grader, a third grader couldn't, right?
So with us, you know what they always tell us? Are you speaking white?
Yeah.
It sounds white. Why
Yeah.
do you sound white? That's what they would tell us.
Right?
So
Right.
you're saying you had to do the reverse in order to communicate with your own people.
Right. And really just to make sure that everybody is receiving the message so that people feel connected. Right? So I did actually serve on the Board of Education. So I was the first Hispanic elected in this community in the East Stroudsburg Area School District in November of 2019. And I always use that example for people to understand how they can make a difference, because sometimes as individuals, we don't realize the power of one person, right? So I try to paint this picture from the national level trickling down to the very community that we are physically in right this moment. And it's that at the national level, there are less than 4% of Latinas, and the number ranges 2 to 4%. So I always use the higher number just to be safe, but less than 4% of Latinas that have a doctoral degree. And there are 14 plus million Latinas in the United States, age 18 and over. So that just gives you kind of the landscape. And then at the state level, while I was serving for 4 years, there are 4,500 elected school board directors across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. According to the Pennsylvania School Board Association, 3% were Latinos, which was 135. When I vacated my seat, that became 134. In this district, I was the first Hispanic. There's no Hispanic currently serving. When I joined the Colonial Intermediate Unit 20 in the state of Pennsylvania, special education goes through intermediate units. So we have 500 school districts and 29 intermediate units. Each intermediate unit represents a cluster of school districts that are a coalition, and they serve them in terms of how do they serve special needs students, what are the services needed, and the number of districts ranges based on how big the districts are. Our intermediate unit number 20 is out of Easton and covers everywhere from Delaware Valley, East Stroudsburg, all the way out to the Lehigh Valley area. And I was the first Hispanic, the first person of color, and the youngest to join that board in December of 2019.
Wow, congratulations for that.
Thank you. And after my first year, I became vice president and served in that capacity for 3 years. In Pike County, I was the only Hispanic elected official, and right now, there's none. So a couple of weeks ago, I had family here from California and Florida, and we were walking around Milford, and so I was saying, from where we drove out this way, and then we went to a wedding upstate, and I was saying, this is the borderlines kind of visual, right? Painting a picture. There's not one Hispanic elected official. And they were like, oh my gosh, it gives you a visual, because we don't realize when we say representation, what does that really mean? We don't realize that if there's not someone at the table that can speak to some of those issues, like you were just able to, right? I brought up a topic and you related to that. You were able to see that was my experience. So whether I'm there or you're there, someone's going to be able to talk about literacy challenges, learning disabilities, right? If there's some group where no one has that experience, how will that experience be captured in terms of policies that are created, in terms of decisions that are made, in terms of where resources are allocated? It won't be, right? Unless either you've had the experience, or you know someone that has had, or you're committed as an ally to paying very close attention to all of those issues.
So not only being an educator, which is special needs, you deal with a lot of kids with special needs. Do you deal with also the administrative part?
On the school board, yes. So the school board actually, and states are different, right? So in New York, there used to also be an elected school board, and then it became, appointed by the governor. So some areas are appointed. So in Philadelphia, it's mayoral control. So in Philadelphia, the mayor appoints the school board. So certain bigger cities, even in the state, so different states might have appointed school board or elected school board. And then even within the state, there may be cities in which those positions are appointed. But the school board oversees school district. So the superintendent, who's the highest position in the school district, reports to the school board. The school board is supposed to be oversight and governance. I spent 4 years trying to remind my colleagues that's what you're supposed to do. The problem is when people get into the political side of it, when people, have agendas, and I want to clarify that we all have some sort of agenda, if you will, right? Whether you have a positive one or not. But when you're focusing more on your agenda than the job at hand, we see what we're seeing across the country in terms of corruption and politics over people and individuals going to serve that forget what their purpose is.
That's what they've done a lot with education already. They politicize it.
Exactly.
The CRT or
don't take me there. That was my whole term.
Right? The diversity, that's the big thing now. We don't want diversity, inclusion, or equity. We don't want that. Which I don't understand that, because how do you get away from it?
But and the rollback of affirmative action by the Supreme Court put a rubber stamp on that, right?
I'm sorry. My question to you is: I know you're focusing more so on diversity and inclusion, of course, leadership development as well. What are some of the strides that you have taken to actually get things passed through to the House or wherever it is that you are, speaking on? Whether it's the Board of Education or things of that nature. What strides have you taken, and what have you gotten passed through?
That's a good question. So the School Board of Education, just for clarity for our listeners, focuses strictly on the school district and some of those policies. So a couple of things that I worked on, and I was the chair of the Educational Programs and Resources Committee for my entire term. I inaugurated that committee. So I was the first chair and stayed there for 4 years. And some of the things that I did was create a forum for members of the community to come in and ask questions in a space that didn't feel as daunting as the regular school board meeting, right? Where you have 9 elected school board directors on the stage and everybody's nameplate is up there, and you come up and use your 3 minutes and there's a big clock, and it's intimidating for people. And so we would always meet by Zoom, started during the pandemic, of course, and we kept that because people would log in from home and just sort of be comfortable. And we had the flexibility not to time those comments so you could have more conversation. If it was a controversial issue, which we did address, book banning and CRT and all of these dynamics, then we would follow the Roberts rules and the regular School Board of Education policy of 3 minutes and timing. So that's one thing that I was really proud of. I also worked to engage members of the community to be able to share what is it that's important to you, and also help them understand how does the school district run and what are your rights, and how do you get to partner with administrators and educators and the different stakeholders, because it does take all of us. As I said earlier, it takes all of us to bring about change. It takes all of us to educate our young people. And then also I helped bring funds and helped have some of my external. I have a national network and I've done a lot of work in the nonprofit sector. And so I've helped have funding opportunities to bring dollars. During the onset of the pandemic, I helped partner with the Secretary of Aging at that time and brought a $75,000 grant to feed the elderly. So when our buses went out to feed the children, they also were able to feed the elderly, which was such an important part because Monroe County had the largest, fastest growing elderly population. And even this morning, I was talking to somebody who's a leader in our community. I won't name, but an issue that they're having with their elderly parent and some challenges. And I said, you know the language, you don't have citizenship issues, and you're connected, you have a leadership position. Imagine those that aren't. Right? People don't know where to go for support and help. So I've always, if somebody calls me to complain, I would always say, and I still do, don't call me to complain, call me to thought partner on a solution, right? Because I can't do it alone, but also explaining to them. Somebody calls and says, my child is being bullied and nobody's doing anything. Well, there's always more to the story. I'm not going to say, you're not telling it, you may not know it, right? Or you're just sharing what you know. And so I would always say, these are the things you have to do to document, to talk to people, to just kind of help them navigate. Who is it that's available to you? How do you engage with them? What's the process? And the more we do that, the more we break down the silos of politics, of, quote unquote leadership, which oftentimes is not leadership, it's actually titles versus people, right? And then, and letting people understand that people have the right to be part of processes, right? And then just other work that I do, I'm appointed to the board of Monroe County Children and Youth by the county commissioners. And that's a point of pride because I was raised by my grandparents. And, I know what it's like not to be with my biological parents. And sometimes you're embarrassed when you're at school, right? And somebody has their mom or their dad and you don't, whether you have a single parent, a foster parent, an adoptive parent, an extended relative. My grandparents were older, and so there were comments around that. Early on, though, I learned how blessed I was to have them. And so that and everybody adopted my grandmother as abuela. So, right? Yeah, so that helps. So I chair the education committee there.
You don't speak Spanish.
I do. Just
he's going to test you.
He is.
He don't speak.
In the spirit of positivity, we're not judging.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So on the board of Monroe County Children and Youth, I chair the education committee. So it's always education related. That's my thing, right? It was my out, right? And my out from life, from the stressors. So I would say when I'm learning still today, there's no such thing as I've reached the highest level. There's always learning. So if I'm in a webinar or a classroom, I actually started a new program on Monday for women entrepreneurs that's funded by NASDAQ run by NASDAQ, funded by Wells Fargo.
I think I saw a flyer or something.
Yeah,
like that.
I'm pretty excited about it. So when I'm learning, it's about me, right? Then life is stopping for an hour or 30 minutes.
Well, that makes you
and
an
that's
all
about
learner.
me.
That's what it does. It makes you an all learner, not an
Yeah.
all knower.
I like that.
I did like to ask you about mental health issues. I know you have to deal with that pretty much in the education system.
Yes.
So how do you deal with the children when they come and they have mental health issues, like to evaluate them, so forth and so on?
Yeah, so that's a great question and so relevant right now. First of all, mental health impacts any age, anyone from any racial, ethnic background, any socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter where you live, you can be impacted by mental health issues and trauma. It looks different for different people. My mom was a victim of homicide. She died when I was 8. She was 27. She left 3 daughters. I was the eldest. That's trauma from early on.
Mm-hmm.
But yesterday, someone was sharing an experience with me who, at a glance, is a middle-aged white male, seems to be good to go, no issues. But there was an experience with a comment that was made by an educator that is deep-rooted. And I said, that's trauma. I said, right? So we can never, I just want to stress, we can never stereotype who is impacted by mental health. That said, it is a focus area because I always say that you cannot educate a child if you're not considering their basic needs, right? If a child is cold because they don't have a coat in the winter, doesn't matter whether they know that 2 + 2 is 4. If they're hungry, if they're homeless, these are all issues that have come to the forefront. They've always happened, but come to the forefront during the pandemic, right? Because more people lost their jobs and were sick, and some people passed away, and the kids ended up with other people. So we see more of that. So one of the things that I partnered with through the education committee on the school board was ensuring that we had holistic positions that were focusing on the whole child. So not just guidance counselor positions. So some of the comments, because no matter what you do well, you'll hear, right, negative comments, and you have to say, okay, it comes with the work. But well, we removed guidance counselors. We didn't remove guidance counselors. We looked at the whole child and understood that a child that is misbehaving is dealing with other issues, right? So the guidance counselor has one aspect, the social worker has one aspect. A person, we put 2 people in place in each of the high schools, North and South. A person that became new to those positions was a reflections coach. That individual helps the student look at their behavior, think about what might have prompted that behavior. How can I get ahead of that behavior and not allow that to take me down a negative path through the process of restorative justice, through being able to, if I had a fight with you or if I disrespected an educator, writing a letter, maybe explaining where some of that came from, so that we empower our young people and our children to take charge of their well-being, right? And we know that anger and resentment, fear, all of those emotions take root and they come out in some of those behaviors. Also through Monroe County Children and Youth, it was a great opportunity. I'm a connector, and so it was a great opportunity to bring together Monroe County Children and Youth, the school district, the CIU 20, and then other organizations to partner. I was the Poconos Commissioner for Governor Tom Wolf for 6 years until he left office on his Latino Affairs Commission, and I chaired the statewide education committee. So I had an opportunity to travel the state working on some of these same issues, not just in our area, but at the state level. So some of that advocacy work I'm still part of, and I served on the Pennsylvania Department of Education's Equity Task Force. I chaired the subcommittee on advocacy, where I was able to guide a committee on providing language for administrators, educators, school board directors to address some of what you talked about, right? When we talk about CRT, that's not in the classroom in a K-12 school. When
Never
we talk
has
about
been.
no, when we talk about DEI, what does it really mean? Right? So I just co-presented a DEI equity in education webinar with a gentleman from the New Jersey School Board Association on Monday, and I'd be happy to share that recording with anyone who's
You
interested.
gave a name. Who did you say?
The New Jersey School Board Association. His name is Paul, and what we talked about, and he's a middle-aged white male. And it was a great partnership, right? Because again, sometimes we need to see someone that looks like us and talks like us. And sometimes we need to see someone that doesn't, but who also cares about us. Because all of those people can speak up for us when we can't speak up for ourselves. And so he and I tag team this conversation on what is equity? What is equity in education? And the realization that people miss is that we've always done DEI from a student with special needs lens because of the IDEA, because of ADA, right? These federal regulations that say you cannot leave out a child with a special need, right? You cannot leave out a person with a documented disability. That is diversity. The problem is, and the reason that people so easily politicize DEI is because they're thinking about race and ethnicity. They're thinking about skin color. They're thinking from a lens of fear that someone like me is going to take their seat at a decision-making table. And they're right. I'm going for your seat because if you're not making decisions that help kids that look like me or you, and even some of you, because there are also poor white children that get left behind, then you don't need to be there. If you're sitting there because you have always been in the community, or your family has always held a position of power, or because you have these ideologies that have been, that's not a good enough reason.
Yeah, and I think that's important for these public officials or anyone who holds a seat of power to go out into the community, not only the community that they serve, because they may not see the underprivileged there, right? They have to go to another community and understand the plight of those people, because not everyone is looking, one, for a handout. Not everyone is is not doing things that they're supposed to do. There are people who are really struggling, and not because they don't want to get up and work or anything like that, or their child is or their child is not doing what they're supposed to do or anything like that. They actually need assistance. And if you don't understand that plight, then you wouldn't even understand the scope of what's happening. My children, they've never had any learning disabilities. And so I can't understand what someone with a learning disability goes through, but I can empathize and I can still help.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people don't understand that, especially if they've never placed a scope on it.
That's I could tell you that people, when they talk about the bullying situation, see, people with learning disabilities, those are usually the first targets, and they come at you hard.
Oh,
man. And kids are hard, man. I'm dead. They are rough, man. Whew. I'll call you stupid in a minute, right in your face.
And I think so. With that being called stupid, I always tell my children, like, do not use that word. And it really comes from home too, because some parents call their children stupid or idiots and things of that nature. And I'm like, hey, that's not right. That's not what you're supposed to do. Oh, that's what my mom did. That doesn't make it okay. I need you to break that. I need you to break that break that pattern, because it's not right. And it definitely is one of those things where we just need to have that presence. We need to get out there and actually care for people. And once we stop being compassionate or having empathy, then we've lost as a human race. Forget about race or creed or color of skin. Doesn't matter. Once you've lost that human compassion, you've lost.
And
that's funny that you say that, because someone told me one time, said I needed to turn in my black card. It was something that I said I did. And I said, well, maybe I should. I'll probably pick up a human card to replace that.
Yeah. It's those are ignorance. Sometimes it's right. People just don't understand.
That's right. Those are assumptions, right? How you're supposed to behave, how you're supposed to talk. You talked earlier about that you're white, and so if you speak properly or pronounce things properly, right? There are these comments, and those are based on assumptions, which people hang on to because it makes them feel like they know what they're talking about, like they have a grip on it, right? They can internalize that. Okay, I know if you're black, you should behave like this. If you're white, you should talk like this. And so it gives them something to hang on to. And when you break those molds, people are really uncomfortable. And I actually, my new book was just released, and I actually addressed that.
Wait, what's the title of your book?
You can't do that. You got to
What's the title?
It's called Maramarianismo, and it's about the relevance.
Can you say it again?
Yes, modern
Uh-huh.
Marianismo. You're gonna try to pronounce it?
Modern.
Marianismo.
This one here,
Modernismo.
she gets it.
Modernismo.
You
There
got
you
good.
go.
You did good.
Yeah.
You did good. And it's about the connection to perfectionism and the imposter syndrome. But the premise of the conversation is that there is a script for how women and women of color are supposed to behave, are supposed to talk, are supposed to be, right? You're supposed to be at home. You're supposed to be, submissive.
Can you hold that thought?
Yes.
We need a station identification.
Station identification. This is Genesis Radio. This is the Empowerment Show. If you feel you want to call in, the number is 888-304-4401.
Please say that number again.
One more time for y'all, 888-304-4401.
Now, what didn't he sound sexy?
I don't know.
You're trying to get
Okay,
All right.
Dr. Damary Bonilla-Rodriguez, you can keep going.
We gonna let you keep going.
He was trying to check if everybody was awake.
Yeah. I was like,
So then I write about how trying to meet those expectations and those standards that are imposed by society in some of the ways that we've been talking about already, but also self-imposed if you internalize in the way that you were saying, right? It's inside, then we're trying to be something that we can't be because we can't be perfect, right? So when you go out and speak in a public event and you motivate all these people and everybody leaves inspired, and this is something I've done, and you come back and say, yeah, but I didn't make dinner tonight, or I missed my kid's game, and so I didn't meet that expectation for myself or for others. I'm not the greatest mom. Those are some of the challenges that we navigate. Then you end up in that imposter syndrome, and the conversation on imposter syndrome is wide right now, but I'm bringing it up from the lens that even when I can sit here and I appreciate the opportunity to actually reflect on the questions you ask about, like, what have you done and what have you introduced? Because I don't always do that. Now I've been more conscious about doing it, but sometimes we're going, and when we are working for others, we're just on the move and we don't stop to say, I feel good about this or that, right? So you end up not accepting the success that you have had or recognizing your achievements. And so then you're in this kind of vicious cycle, right? So my own journey is captured, and it's an extension of my doctoral research from 14 years ago, where I wrote about the characteristics, positive influences, and the areas that hinder. That focus was Latina leadership. And over the last 14 years, as I've done the leadership development work that you talked about in different sectors, I've worked in corporate, in government, and politics, but mostly from an advocacy and on the grounds community lens. I've heard from women from all backgrounds who have said, to some level, that impacts me, because Marianismo is a word to describe Latina women's behaviors. And so I had an African American colleague, and she's a PhD, and we were talking about it, and she said, that's impacted me, but I didn't have a name for it. And I've had Italian women say to me, oh, in the Italian culture, that is so similar, right? So it's come up, and so in the book, I broaden it. And my husband read it. He didn't touch it until it was physically here about 3 weeks ago, and he read it, in one weekend, because what I did was simplify all of these complicated topics with a little bit of research, a little bit of me, and a little bit of strategy, or how can you kind of work through it in a way that you could pick it up, and each side is a page of text and the left side is a photo, so that it kind of breaks up, right, all of this complicated topic, to give you a chance to actually get your head around, oh, this is what I've been facing, and so let me think about what can I do to work through it.
And this is a form of trauma, what he said too. When he's speaking to someone and they say you're speaking white, that could, if he wasn't a stronger person, if he was a weaker person, right, that person would probably say, you know what, I need to change the way that I actually am, because it does not fit someone else's description of who I should be.
Mhm.
And that's when you get that imposter syndrome
Mhm.
because you're thinking, you know what? I should be like this, but no, you should be who you are supposed to be,
That's
who you're
exactly
called
right.
to be, and
Mhm.
no one gets to dictate that.
That's right.
And you should be proud of it.
That's right.
Agreed.
And that's exactly what I said in the book. You have the freedom to define yourself.
I love it.
So while I was writing it for women, I have had several men, including my husband, that have read it and said, this spoke to me too, because in exactly how you shared, there are some experiences that even men have with others' expectations. You know, it's more prevalent for women because of just the way that society has always viewed women, including the comments made by the football player at the commencement.
Yeah.
It's like,
Oh, my God.
what in the world?
Yeah.
Your religious views are your own. That's all fine and dandy, but you have to be careful the lens that you put forth in terms of the expectations. I love cleaning my house. I talk
Mhm.
about that all the time in different platforms, from
Mhm.
podcasts to a stage in front of thousands of people. I love cleaning my house, not because I was told that I had to, but because I always say to my family, this is my love language. When the house is clean, when it's in order, I feel that it minimizes chaos and it keeps things calm.
Gives
There's
you
a level,
peace.
exactly.
Mhm.
There's a level of peace,
And
and
I-
to be
I
honest,
relate
a
to
little
that.
control.
Yeah. You're right.
Definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love cleaning. So
See?
I'm home and I'm like, everything's got to get organized. And I remember one day, like, things were a little bit chaotic in my bedroom. And I'm like,
Mhm.
wifey, I'm sorry, but like, you're not going to like me right now. She's like, what's up? And I'm like, I got to get rid of all this. I can't look at it no
Oh,
more.
you sound like my husband.
I like turned into like Tasmanian
He's like, less is
devil.
more.
Less is
Yeah, I was
more.
like, get it
And
all
then I
out.
have to buy all
Yeah.
these different cute compartments and
To
shelves
organize.
to organize. I'm like, I can't deal. I can't. Everything needs to have its place.
Yeah.
I get you, Jose. I
Yeah.
get it.
But just to ask you about, just to really back to school, back
Yeah.
in education and the kids that you have to deal with.
Mhm.
Do you have to deal with a lot of substance abuse? I know fentanyl is like a really big thing going on now. Do you have to deal with it? And if you do, how many children do you have to deal with that situation?
So I will answer generally in terms of education because, of course, the specific numbers and situations are protected in terms of protecting student identities. But in education, in addition to some of the issues we've touched on, like homelessness and mental health issues and, racial and ethnic dynamics and DEI, the substance abuse piece has been critical. It also impacts mental health. It also impacts some of those other areas we've talked about. But one of the biggest areas that schools, not just in our district, but across the country have had to deal with is the vaping. People think it's not a big deal. It's some parents and guardians have allowed students to vape because they don't realize the negative impact, right? And it doesn't feel like a cigarette, or it doesn't feel like a beer. It doesn't feel, and so they think that it's minimal. But the vaping has been the biggest in terms of substances issue across the country, and seeing children as early as elementary school and more children even in middle school than you would expect have accessed vaping. In the state of Pennsylvania, there is a survey that all the school districts give to students to understand what the issues are. And that's one of the data points that we are able to speak to, that we can look at and say, oh, there's been an increase in this use, and what is it, and be able to identify it. That's a way that you can protect students' identity and data and use across the board data. And that has demonstrated that vaping has been the biggest issue. One of the challenges in terms of education, and you touched on it earlier when you said it comes from the parents, it comes from home, right, is that school districts have regulations that, policies and regulations that a child, student vaping, bringing the paraphernalia to school ends up in suspension and, or depending on the gravity of it, being expelled. And what happens then is, when you don't have a home life that is conducive to saying, okay, we're going to work through this, we're still going to figure out how to get you educated, we lose those young people. Like, they fall through the cracks. So some of the other programs that we did put in place were programs with the coalitions and task force addressing substance abuse. And that was very personal to me, growing up in the projects in New York City, having family that was incarcerated and that dealt with all of these dynamics, knowing how that can derail you from even a little bit of a positive future. Like, that's critical for our students. And so we did put in place a program that allows this individual that's leading it in this district, and other districts have done other things, but to work with the student and their family. And there's a commitment that the family has to make in addition to the student to help the student work through it. And what it does is it cuts here in the district, it's an alternative to expulsion. It cuts the time in half. So if they were going to be expelled for 90 days, it would be 45 with successful completion of the program. And it creates a support network for the student to be able to work with this person that's leading the program, with experienced individuals from the coalitions, with their family, and then with other students that have been there. And there has been a huge success rate here in the district with that project, because if we cannot prevent it from happening, which prevention is the best thing, right? If we can prevent it, great. But if we can't, then how do we get ahead of it?
That's a very good question, almost like a loaded question. If you want
Yeah,
to
you see, I stopped.
if we kind of knew how to get ahead of it, then we wouldn't have a problem at all.
But we should always keep asking ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So that we're actually taking steps and putting in place
Well,
measures.
that's very good, and it's nice that you're a good pillar of the community, as they want to say. But how do you lead by example? What examples do you have that you lead, that so the children or other people or parents or a person like me, what do you do to give me examples?
That's a really good question. And it's actually the way that I've lived my whole life, because when you're 8, everybody says I was a grown-up when I was 3, because apparently I was taking the microphone at church and preaching of some sort. But, and I guess at 4, I said I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney, which I did, but I couldn't afford to go to law school because at the time you had to only go to school. You couldn't work and go to school, right? So back to your question, when you're 8 and you lose your mother and you don't have that example, right? I didn't have, I was actually texting with my sister this morning and saying, I'm really proud of you and my other sisters, 3 of us, and us, because we didn't have an example of what it was like to be a mother or a wife, right? Our mother died when she was young, and our fathers weren't in the picture. My sister's dad, was there later in her life, and he passed away about 2 years ago, but we didn't have that stable example. And so the fact that we have access to higher education, and we have houses that are also homes, right? Because you can have a house that's not a home. So we have physical houses, being that we grew up in poverty, but then we also have converted those into homes. It is the way I've always lived my life. How can I be a role model to my sisters? Because they were each 2 years younger. So my sister was 6. My sister Carmen, she's in LCSW and she works for Child Protective Services in New York. And my sister Erica was 3.5, close to turning 4, and she's a sergeant in the NYPD. And so I've always worked to, and my sister just posted about my new book and said, like, you've always been an advocate since we were teens, since we were kids, as long as I can remember. And that's how I've tried to live my life. I'm not perfect, but one of the things that I do to lead by example is share my imperfections. And so when I show up, I always say, when I show up to contribute. I'm also a fighter. People don't always like that, right? So I don't sugarcoat things.
I've been in a couple meetings with you, right?
I always say we don't have time to sugarcoat, because the situations that our children and youth are dealing with, especially, but that people are dealing with, are urgent. So I live with a sense of urgency and a sense of purpose. So when I come, I want you to hear what I have to say. Sometimes that's misunderstood. And so I do have to backtrack. That's an area that I can always be growing in and say, okay, but did you understand, to your point earlier, did you understand where I was coming from? Do you understand the dynamic? Some of it is just political and people just don't like me, and that is what it is. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. But in order for me to lead by example, I always try to share things that help people realize that I'm human, right? Like in the book, where I share my own experiences.
I gotta read this book.
And I've received
That's right.
feedback from people that have said, I didn't know that you deal with perfectionism, or I didn't know that you deal with imposter syndrome. And I'm like, I'm human.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
We all do.
We
Yeah,
do.
we
all
do.
And those are the silos we have to break down.
Yeah.
And that's leading by example.
Leading
It's
by
being able to
example.
say, I also deal with that.
Yeah, and I think that you sharing your story about, your upbringing helps as well, because there's so many people that may want to make excuses for where they are because of their upbringing. But you've gone through you lost your parents when you were young. You got raised. You were raised by your grandmother. Your grandmother, right?
Yeah.
Grandparents.
Well,
Right. So it's some people will say, this is where I came from, and I couldn't get away from it. But there are also choices that you made.
I was waiting for you to finish to say it's about choices.
It's about the choices that you make.
Yeah.
Because I can actually relate, because my parents passed. Both of my parents were in the 80s. They were in New York City with the crack epidemic,
Wow.
right?
Mhm.
So they both died young. 13 when I was 13 and I was 17.
Wow.
So now, there are people who would say to me, like, I can't believe that you're actually who you are today. I'm like, what can't you believe? It's the choices that I made, because I knew that I did not want to end up like that.
Right.
So let me do what I need to do to make sure that I don't end up like that. And I think that right there is a testament to your strength, one, and also to the fact that if you can do it, I can do it.
Mhm.
And it's just all about the choices that you make.
Mhm.
So you are a pillar of strength, and I salute you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you as
Sure.
well. And the more people open up in that way,
Mhm.
people are afraid to be vulnerable because of what you said earlier, the judgment. It's not just kids that judge other kids, but there's this lens that is judgmental,
Yeah.
even sometimes when people don't intend to be. It's just their expectation that, like, I didn't expect that you would turn out that way if you lost your parents yet. I didn't expect it. And you're saying, it's the only way I've known.
Right.
I made the choice to follow a good path because I knew what I didn't want to end up doing. Right.
Mhm.
So those expectations lead people to judge people. And so we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? We have to be comfortable disagreeing, and we have to be comfortable debating and being passionate. And in the moment, I'm going to give it all I have, 100+%, right?
Yes.
When we leave here, I'm happy to sit with you and have dinner. I'll serve you at my dinner table at home. I always say that to people, but people cannot differentiate their roles. And this is something I've been talking about a lot just in the last few days. People are not able to take off one hat and put on another. And in order to be a good leader, we have a lot of people with titles, and we say
Mhm.
leadership. They're not leading, they have titles. But in order to be a good leader, you have to be able to shift your hat, right?
Yep.
So I came in, I was rushing to get my kids from tennis. I dropped them off at home, kind of tag team to my husband. I left dinner made because I knew they were going to be hungry after school, after tennis, right? He could have managed it. He would have managed it, right? That was okay. I took care of it. I've had a long day. But when I sat here, I'm all in here,
Mhm.
right? I'm connecting with you. I'm in the moment. It's about what we're sharing.
Yeah.
We have to model for kids, for people, what it is that we want to see. And that means being able to say, oh, I kind of messed up, or being able to say, yeah, I was really passionate about it. So yeah, I got a little loud.
Yeah.
And being able to say, I'm vulnerable, right?
Mhm.
I've shared many times how I sit in my big office chair and cry sometimes because it's exhausting to be in the place of being scrutinized. But, I've had to explain why I need to be called doctor in public, in the school board of education. I've had to explain just so many parts about my identity
Right.
when I came to work, but I can't get to work because I'm having to explain to you what it's like to be me. But if explaining to you what it's like to be me is going to help you advocate for and serve these students that are sitting in the seats that look like me, because a quarter of the students in the East Stroudsburg Area School District do identify as Hispanic.
Yes. Yes.
And so if doing that is going to help students,
Mhm.
then so be it. And that's some of what I spent my time doing in the last 4 years as well.
Yeah, and I know that you actually are helping during, with, I guess it's from elementary school through high school. Have you done anything on the collegiate level? And what are some of those things that you've done?
So I actually always thought that I would focus more on higher ed, just because, right, I was able to access formal education, and it was so enlightening for me to be in classrooms in undergraduate where I saw women of color with the doctor title. I never even thought about it. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I even took the exam. But then when I figured out that I couldn't afford it, because my husband and I actually took custody of my sister when she was almost 14, and she lived with us until she went to college. So I took a break in higher education, in my higher education journey. But when I first got to college and I saw some of these amazing women, I realized there could be another path, right? So then when I came back, I focused on my bachelor's degree and then my master's degree, and then learned that there was such a thing as a doctorate with a focus in leadership. And I was like, what? That's what I want to do. And so, and I didn't like research. I have to tell you that. I did not like research. I found it to be boring and tedious until I realized that research could give a voice to people like me, and that I could use my research to give a voice to people like me. And to date, 14 years later, my dissertation is the only dissertation in the United States foundational to Latina leadership. So others are specific, Latina leaders in education or, in a specific sector. Mine is not. Mine is general across the board characteristics, positive experiences, challenges that hinder. And so, so then you realize that you can be a voice to others. That's the part that I transferred to the higher education. So I do work with colleges and universities. I've had an opportunity in East Stroudsburg to do work around civic engagement at East Stroudsburg University, civic engagement, work with first generation students and their families, right? Because that was my experience to be able to say, these are the challenges that I faced. These are, what the data shows, these are the challenges your students might face. Because it's not just about getting students to college, it's helping them succeed through college, right?
Yes.
Because sometimes they don't make it.
Got a question to ask you. So a young person just wants to be like you. They want to be you. They want to experience what you experience and develop into the type of person that you've become. What advice would you give that person?
At first, I would say to them, I want them to do more than I've done. I say that to all young people, and that I want them to see the opportunity. So I always talk about the keys to success are around mentorship and support, right? Find people, if you don't have anybody in your immediate circle, is it an educator? Is it a community leader, a coach, someone at your church, anyone that you admire that is willing to invest the time in you. So I had mentors along the way. I still have mentors and coaches and people that I call for spiritual guidance, for challenges in leadership, for motherhood challenges. And then also that you keep an eye on what is available to you in the way that you talked about, right? I don't want to go down this path, but what can I do with what I have? And so the women in my family did not access higher education, but they were hardworking. And what they did full force. My aunt Esty, who's just 11 months younger than my aunt, all my aunts and uncles have filled part of that void, but especially her, she was a nurse's aide. She's tiny, very small frame, and she loved on her patients, and she would hold these individuals that were much bigger than she was, and she would move them, and I never knew how she did it. But she figured it out. She kept them clean, and they lived with dignity in the nursing home where she worked. And I would visit, and I volunteered there over the summer, and I loved seeing that. I loved seeing her in action. So what is around you that even when it feels like, I don't know where I'm going, things are crazy, maybe your immediate home is not conducive to that, what is around you that you can take and use that? And programs, right? I went to Girls Inc. when I was a girl, and then I worked there for 15 years, leading their national diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, going across the country, working with organizations and their boards and frontline staff on how to work with diverse girls. And that was an opportunity to give back, but also to really understand the issues of girls, not just in my community, but across the country. And that's how I started building my national network. So that's the other thing I tell people, build your network. You don't have to be best friends with everybody. To be honest, I don't even have to like everybody that I work with. If I like you or there's some general connection, that's even better. But you should always be able to work with people, and you build your network in that you're able to give and receive. There are times that people call me from all over, even global, because they've read my work and they want to talk. And sometimes I say, I only have 15 minutes. I mean, there's a lot of demand, but I always give people time. Sometimes I'll say, I can't get on a call for the next month because I'm really backed up, but I can email with you, or I can send you something, or if you send me questions, I can respond. So everything from interviews for the scouts to interviews for higher education students that are pursuing their bachelor's or their master's in education, to giving talks, to doing webinars, anything that I can do to give back and be on the forefront and say to people, you can do more than I did. Because if you hear it earlier, then you're going to have an
Like
advantage,
that,
right?
like
And that's
that.
why I'm writing a version of the book for teens, 8 to 14, that I hope to finish this summer. I put a pause on it so that we could translate the book into Spanish, because that wasn't in the plan, but I was getting requests. So we're rolling it out in Spanish in a couple of weeks, and then I'll finish the teen book so that our teens are understanding earlier on. Because imagine if you knew at age 12 what you learned at age 30.
You wanted to go farther and further.
Exactly.
Well, we're coming down to the last couple of minutes of the show, and we'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. Again, Kendall Stevenson, host of the show, the Empowerment Show.
Shaquana Terry, co-host of the Empowerment Show.
And I tell you, we're gonna have you back again,
Yeah.
because we're gonna have to get an update.
Okay.
I need to know what's
Yeah.
going on with the kids in this town, in our state, and in our community. All right. August 17th, Unity in the Community, 12 noon. We'd like to have everybody come out. You can inform people that it's going to be a good time.
I've been sharing the flyer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, then it's going to be a good time. Like
Yeah.
last year, we had the cars. We're going to have the cars again. We got photography. We got videography. We got drones that they're going to come out.
Oh,
They're going to have a lot of fun. You're going to have live music. So it's going to be a great time.
Dansbury
Prayer
Park.
session as well.
awesome.
At Dansbury Park on August 17th.
I tell you, this dry cough is killing me. You know what it is? I think it's the air is dry in here, because it's when I come in here, if I'm sitting there too long, every time.
And my lips have been very dry since I sat. When there's dry air, my
Yeah.
lips dry out.
Mhm.
So
And doesn't help when you're talking a lot.
Yeah.
Well,
either,
that
so
too,
it's like-
get ready, yes.
Yeah.
All right. So again, thank you guys for tuning into the Empowerment Show. Hopefully we see you guys next week. Give us a call. The telephone number is 888-304-4401. Kendall Stevenson, Shaquana Sherry. Peace. We are out.
Yeah.
She had a little something to say.
Thank you for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel.